14 here at the Victory Garden, and we are going to again take a look at how everything's doing, talk a little bit about what to do with your out of control veggies. We're going to look at a few of our flowering plants, and we're going to talk about pollination and how that works. And Sue, how was the weather in the last week?
Yeah, well, so I feel like a broken record here because I once again have a completely full rain gauge. So this week we again got over 4 inches of rain, and so now I think we're on our 4th week of really substantial rainfall. So that is not a normal summer. We've been having some crazy heavy rains. So yeah, we'll take a walk through the garden and see how things are doing. So here's our squash plants taking over the world. They are really thriving in this weather, and as you can see, they're taking over our gate here. So Sal and I were kind of talking about personal preferences when it comes to gardening. And I was actually here the other day with my sister, and she said to me, oh my gosh, I would have to move those squash plants. That would drive me crazy. But yeah, what do you think, Sal, about our squash plants here?
You know, I have the tendency to just let plants do what they seem to want to do, even to the point of, you know, not using an entrance and instead making another entrance somewhere else in the garden. So personally, I think this looks great. I just make, you know, maybe 1 or 2 stepping spots and just kind of try to walk around the plants. But otherwise, I can definitely understand some people's distress with a garden gone wild.
So one other thing I'm going to note here as we're walking into the garden is that even though we have had so much rain, I don't know if you remember back earlier in the season when we had a lot of rain, we couldn't even walk in the garden. But right now, because of all the plants that we have in here, the plants are absorbing so much moisture that the garden is actually fairly dry, even though we had, you know, another 4 inches of rain this week. So I just want to note that has implications for, you know, urban settings, and so it's a really important thing to keep in mind, sort of just as we're looking at global climate, global weather. Plants can really mitigate extreme rainfall events.
So here we are in our tomato patch, which is again doing really well, so no complaints there. However, the tomatoes on the left side I never pruned, and they are starting to join the squash ocean over there and just completely obliterating our paths. So we're gonna have to do something about that so we're able to even get in and harvest them. On this side, I did some pruning of the tomatoes, pruned off some of the lower branches and just extra branches. So you can see that they are growing a little more upright, and it's a little bit easier to access the tomatoes. And they're next to the cucumbers that have also been trellised, so that's kind of keeping them more in a vertical direction than going everywhere. Something you can do if your plants are just really going everywhere, and we're going to kind of do to these tomatoes over here, is just, you know, I like to use twine here, but just to get something and just kind of pull up any of these branches or anything that's laying in the way, and just, you know, tie them up. And it doesn't have to be too complicated, it can be really simple, but just trying to get the plant up off the ground and out of the way, and that's also going to help you see where your tomatoes are when it's time to harvest them. And then over here we had that cabbage, if you remember from last week, that was starting to get a bit of rot on it. Some of the leaves were dying back. So I made sure to harvest that, and I took off about 6 of the outer leaves, and there was only a little bit of damage inside. So that was great. And then instead of removing the plant, and this is something you can do if you've got the space, you don't want to take it out and plant something else. So I left the plant, and Cabbage do this really cool thing where they will try to make new cabbage heads after you harvest the first one. So if you can see, there's some little cabbages forming right along kind of the leaf edges. And so these will grow, and we'll just wait until either they fill up the entire space again or until the end of the season. And this is a cool way to get like a second crop from your cabbage plant. So they're gonna end up being the size from like Brussels sprouts to maybe like a baby, like 1 pound cabbage head. But something fun you can try out with your cabbage if you wanna see if you can get that second crop from it.
So here we are at some of our other tomato plants, and you may remember earlier in the year I mentioned that sometimes tomato cages aren't quite big enough for a tomato plant, and we have an example here. This plant has totally taken down our tomato cage. What I'm gonna do, and I can show you the end result, is I'm gonna put a stake in here. I'm gonna just pound it right into the ground, and then I'm going to attach the cage to the stake to help hold the cage up. You don't want to try and remove the cage at this point because that would do a lot of damage to the plant, but a stake in the ground will help to stabilize this tomato cage. And then over here we have a plant. We have a plant that is just tied to a wooden stake. I did not do a very good job of keeping up with it, but we do have our very first red tomatoes on this particular plant, so that's exciting. And with this one, kind of like what Sal was saying earlier, I could just keep kind of bringing the branches that are out of control, just kind of bringing them closer to the stake and tying them in. It's also a fine time to do some more pruning. You know, if there are branches that are just way out of the way, you know, feel free to do some pruning on your plant at this point.
Okay, so squash is also coming for the carrot and beet row, but the carrots and beets are looking super nice, really good leafy growth. So we're gonna do our weekly check-in with the carrots to find out when they're gonna be nice and ready. So I am just going to grab a specimen here. All right, so this is definitely the size where I would start. If there's any that are even close together, I would just, you know, kind of thin them. But really, I am harvesting these smaller size carrots because I cannot wait to eat fresh carrots. So this is a good size to start with if you want some salad carrots. Otherwise, if they're really nicely spaced apart, you could probably let them go for another couple weeks, and hopefully if your soil is not too clayey or too compacted, they're just gonna keep getting bigger and be those nice sized carrots in just a couple weeks probably. And again, our cauliflower, which we visited last week, is just growing. It's got good leaves, not too much pest damage, but unfortunately they are not making any heads yet. So this year's been just, the weather hasn't been super conducive for cauliflower, it seems. I've heard from some other gardeners that their cauliflower plants look great, but they're just not making any heads. So we're just gonna let these hang out here and see if they decide to start doing something later in the season when it cools down a little bit. And another potential culprit could be all of these beautiful squash vines. They could be crowding out the cauliflower and just providing a little bit more competition than the cauliflower prefers. So we might try to move a few of the vines to just make a little more space here. And then heading over to another brassica, we'll take a look at our broccoli. So we've got 3 more broccolis here, and one of them is a pretty nice head, so we'll just let that one go and get a little bit bigger. And the one next to it is kind of intermediate, where this maybe is going to make a little bit more of a head, but we'll probably want to harvest it soon. And then this furthest one over, as you can see, the florets are starting to split, they're starting to separate, and so that means that this is bolting, which is essentially the plant it's ready to make seeds, it's ready to be done. So if your plant starts looking like this, you're definitely going to want to cut the head and eat it, because otherwise it's going to just get bigger, going to put on these yellow flowers, which are good for pollinators but also make the broccoli taste really bitter. So you want to catch any of your like broccoli or cauliflower plants before they start bolting.
And here we are back at our beans. We've been having some really steady bean harvests, and so that's been great. and we're gonna just keep harvesting the beans. But I did want to talk to you a little bit about seed saving. The bean seeds that you got are what's called an open pollinated variety. And so that means that the seed will come true to type. So if you want to, a really fun thing to do would be to just let some of your plants go, and then the beans will get mature, and then they'll dry, and then you'll actually have bean seed that you can keep for next year. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick the best couple plants. You always want to take seed from your best plants, and we're going to just quit harvesting on those plants, and we're just going to let those plants make some bean seed for us. One thing I want to mention is that the reason that we can keep seed from these beans is because they're the only beans that we have in the garden. So what would happen if we had a different kind of bean right next to them is that they might cross-pollinate. But because we just have this one type of bean, we know that the seed is not going to be from a cross-pollination of two different types of beans. And so I'm just going to put in a little plug that I think next year we are going to plant more open pollinated varieties of vegetables, and we're going to talk a lot more about seed saving. But this year we'll also just be kind of starting to dip our toes in.
So speaking of cross-pollination, these are some zucchinis that I grew on my farm, and we get a lot of our seeds from seed savers and other companies that do open pollinated varieties. We are trying to get more and more into seed saving over the years because it's an awesome way to have your own seeds growing and control your seed stock so you don't have to worry about companies running out. But it's also just a fun thing to do to kind of have your plants become more regionally adapted. So these plants were not kept isolated, so they look like they cross-pollinated with another kind of zucchini. These are both supposed to be just a green, smooth-skinned zucchini, but as you can see, this one has a lot of yellow speckling, so it appears that the parent plant might have been cross-pollinated by yellow squash. And this one, if you can see, it might be a little tough out here in the sunlight. This one has a lot of bumps on it, a lot of like wardiness, so it appears that this one may have been cross-pollinated by a yellow crookneck, bumpy skin squash. Just some examples. The rest of our squash are nice and green, but a few plants in there, it looks like they had some cross-pollination occur last season with their seed plant. And just to clear up a few misconceptions with cross-pollination, so that's not something that is going to affect your plants or your vegetables this year. It's only going to affect if you were saving that seed. So if your zucchinis and your yellow squash or winter squash are planted next to each other and there's pollinators visiting all of them, that's not going to affect what crop grows because that plant already knows what fruit it's going to set. However, if they're being cross-pollinated, that is going to affect those seeds inside of that plant, so it will affect next year's crop. But you don't have to worry about any cross-pollination changing the flavor or color or anything of any of your crops this season. So it's been a while since we visited our raised beds, but they are doing really well. This rain is really nice for them, so we haven't had to water them as frequently because they are more well drained. And then with our tomato plant here, I'm using this existing post and just tying up the branches to the post, and they are doing really well, just kind of growing around it. And I let a few of them just kind of sprawl around here, but otherwise this plant is really well, just has a lot of good airflow, and it just looks really nice, and it's going to be super easy to pick our tomatoes once they're ripe. So this is looking really nice. And then if you're looking for a little edible landscaping, you can see the flowers that we've got here, and even some more vegetables. So we've got some beautiful flowers, and then we've got this ruffled kale, which kind of goes nicely with the flowers, just adds a little bit more visual interest. We do have this rogue ground cherry that sprouted up here, and we just kind of left it. So this might be a little bit bigger than you'd like in your raised bed, but also it is a very striking plant. And finally, we have these really cute little cucumbers growing, and they took a little bit longer to germinate and a little bit longer to take off, but they are going to be really nice in a week or two when they really start to fill in over here. So this is a fun way to mix in like attractive landscaping with also some edible plants that you can get some food from. And again, just to revisit our other raised bed, this is where we planted bean seeds. And as you can see, this bean has completely taken over the trellis. So it's completely, all the vegetation is covering the kind of backbone of it. And so it's just this really nice, it masks some of the noise and some of the visuals from the road. So it's providing that sort of cover, but then it also just looks really cool. There's some pollinators flying around in here. And this is a really funky bean. So it's a little more decorative as well as edible. This is, it's called a yard-long red noodle bean. So it tastes like a green bean, you eat it the same way, but this thing can grow 3 feet long and it's like this nice magenta color. So this is gonna be a really fun one when the beans start coming in, just to appreciate and admire as well as get, some food from.
Well, I think that is it for this week. Couple things that are coming up that we wanted to remind you of. One is that we do have the happy hour coming up. So we'd really love to see you all. It's going to mainly be, a social time and also, check out the garden and Q&A. So we're really looking forward to that. And then we also have a class coming up on soil and composting. So if you're interested in diving a little more deeply into either of those topics, I encourage you to sign up for that. What else do we have going on, Sal?
Well, I guess since now is the end of July, beginning of August, and all of our stuff is coming in and just really starting to get to that harvesting level, I think we're going to integrate a little bit more discussion on cooking and recipes and ideas for what to do with your harvest. So I think we'll start that next week and try to bring some interesting ideas to your table.
Yeah, great. So, as always, put any questions you have in the comments, use the Facebook page, and we thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week.
See you, everybody.